1.1%. That's the percentage of Arabs and Muslims living in America today. According to the US Census, Arabs are characterized as white, along with descendants from Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Historically, people who have been considered as white have benefited from white privileges. But are we really white though? Before I continue, for clarity's sake, I just wanted to state that I currently live in the Middle East, so now you know. When talking about racism while growing up here in the Middle East, as well as studying the subject in school, the topic was always about black and white. We studied all about slavery and how many Africans were forced into slavery in different parts of the world. I also read the book Roots as a teen. I was also exposed to the subject through TV, of course. I always remember being grateful and relieved that I didn't have to go through that kind of discrimination. As a kid, I felt a lot of sympathy for those Africans and blacks. I mean, how could someone live their lives as a slave, with someone else controlling every part of their life, when they eat or sleep, what they do and where they go? In my mind, it was worse than prison. We were taught that we are all equal in front of God. So how can so many people go against God like that? I was so naive. It wasn't until I went to college in Chicago in 1995 that I found out that I wasn't white. My cousin there told me that we were classified as brown. This was a completely new color to me. I remember being demoralized after feeling so privileged all my life, and that no one will ever bother me for the color of my skin. I felt so underprivileged now. I now had a disadvantage of being colored. What was I to do? Yes, that shocking news was a big deal to me. Although categorized into a dominant white racial classification, Arabs in America are still socially perceived as an other or outsider, alongside stereotypes associating the Arab label with anti-American sentiments. According to my knowledge, Jews have that same issue in America till today, as they are not considered pure white. Although Italians, who are considered darker than normal, especially the ones coming from southern Italy, have officially passed as white in the 19th century. I'm sorry if I'm making some of you uncomfortable while I talk about this sensitive topic, but I prefer to be open about this and not bullshit you guys. I have to talk about history, culture, psychology, and identity. So let me continue a little bit more. Psychology says that we are all prejudiced. This means we have an implicit or hidden bias towards certain groups, whether that be race, gender, age, or anything else. In my last video, I talked about tribalism and how that affects our prejudices as well, and it's simply in our nature to feel that way. It's only when we act on these prejudices is when it becomes discrimination. In previous videos also, I talked about Orientalism. That was caused by colonialism. All this leads to how others view us and how we view ourselves. I'm saying this because these biases affect whether we get a job or not. They affect our wages. They affect whether a stranger will stop and help us if we needed it, and how the police will treat us when they pull us over. Today, the largest Arab ancestries in the US are Lebanese, Egyptian, and Syrian respectively. Palestinian, Moroccan, Iraqi, Jordanian, and Yemeni follow these also, in that order according to the US Census in 2013. From the 1% Arabs and Muslims, there's no doubt that Middle Easterners have a presence in America. It's easy to notice celebrities in the music and movie industries. While Vince Vaughn and Casey Kasem, or Qasim, were at one time two of America's biggest celebrities, who also both happen to be Lebanese. Also, public figures like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who made a lot of noise in politics over the past couple of years. We can also find individuals of Arab descent in the field of science and medicine, like Dr. Michael Debaghi, who designed the artificial heart, and Ahmed Hassan Zuwail. Also, Farouk Elbaz and Fawaz Ulabi, who both worked at NASA. Let's also not forget two of my favorites, Gibran Khalil Gibran and Edward Said, who are both famous for their literary work, and the list goes on. Well, it's obvious that like the other 97% of Americans, including my parents, that we are all originally immigrants who traveled from all over the world to come to this special place called America. Technically, we can exclude the 13.4% of African Americans who are not originally immigrants. They were historically slaves, forced to come to America. I feel really awkward saying that, but it's worth mentioning. Arab immigration to the United States has occurred in 3 waves. The first wave, 1924 to 1947, during the Depression and World War II. The second wave, 1948 to 1966, following the Nakba adversity, a war between Jews and Palestinians, referred to as the Arab-Israeli War. And the third wave, 1967 to 2005, throughout internal conflict in the West Bank, Lebanon, Iraq, and Kuwait. Middle Easterners, especially the Muslim ones, have faced a lot of challenges ever since we stepped foot in this country. Part of this challenge was fitting in and being accepted by America. I remember being embarrassed in the first grade when I was asked to say my last name, Abdul Hamid, in front of the whole class. I was embarrassed because I was the only Arab in class, and I knew my name sounded odd or out of place, even though I was in the Bronx, New York, one of the most diverse cities in the world. I still felt different. Plus, believe it or not, I was very shy as a kid and far from being outspoken. Maybe I'm overcompensating now. Who knows? As immigrants, we come from our home countries with our own names, skin color, clothes, language, food, social and behavioral norms and beliefs and values. Some of these attributes fit in the communities we live in, and many of them simply stand out. This is one big reason why we are looked at as strangers, outsiders, who don't belong. Let's face it, many people fear what they don't understand and what's different. That's why immigrants go through so much hassle. Fast forward to New York, September 11, 20 years ago, where many Arabs and Muslims went through a pretty tough time while being blamed for the tragic loss that many American families suffered. 2 decades later, and we are still not in the clear. According to a paper by Claudia Joachim called Racial and Ethnic Identity in the Chicagoland area, Arab American millennials have come to internalize their Middle Eastern ethnic and religious identity due to 9/11. She says the social experiences of Arab American millennials are frequently made in relation to the attacks play a pivotal role in the construction of their identity. So even though some of us are indistinguishable from European whites, we both still find it difficult to define ourselves as white, nor even be considered as white by other American ethnic communities. Even though the US Census classifies Arabs as white, even grouping black Arabs from Sudan, and by extension, other black and brown people who are Arabic-speaking settled in other parts of the MENA region under this category, many sociologists argue that although Arab Americans may racially identify as white, their perception of themselves is not in harmony with their state-given classification. I've come a long way since the first grade, and so have many other Arab Americans, and this series is being made to tell their story. So let's find out together who were the first Middle Easterners to come to America, and when, and why is it important to know about it. If you want to be notified about my next video, just simply subscribe and hit that notification button. I'll be talking about the very beginning of America, Christopher Columbus and the Spanish Muslims, Muslim slaves like Kunta Kinte, and even a guy called Mansa Musa, and how they influenced bringing Muslims to America. So stay tuned. And if you would like to help me continue my work, consider supporting Optimistic Arab on Patreon. Until next time.
I would say colonialism is a wonderful thing. It spread civilization to Africa. Before it, they had no written language, no wheel as we know it, no schools, no hospitals, not even normal clothing. Let's see about that, Mr. Smith.
Once upon a time, a long time ago, In a faraway land, there lived a great king. They say that he was probably the greatest king that ever lived throughout history. They say that for two reasons. One, because he was the richest king that ever lived. And two, because he used his wealth to help everyone he met. And his name was Mansa Musa. The most famous story about him was when he went to pilgrimage, or Hajj, to Mecca. It is said that he traveled with over 60,000 men from his kingdom in Mali all the way to the next continent, to Mecca, to perform Hajj. And on his path, he gave away gold bars to any poor person he stumbled upon. He also had his men build new homes and mosques for areas and people in need. It is also said that he helped boost the economies of countries he passed by, most famously Egypt. The economies improved because of the new marketplaces. When Mansa Musa was in Mecca, the merchants profited greatly. Musa's servants were elegantly dressed and were easily spotted in the marketplace. The merchants would charge up to 5 times the actual price and made a great profit from it. So much for ethics. I guess people were always greedy. Historians noted that his predecessor Abu Bakr II appointed him to take care of the kingdom while he set a 200-ship voyage headed west to discover new lands and never came back. So this debunks the idea that Africans reached America before Christopher Columbus. But on the other hand, 200 years later, when Christopher Columbus reached South America, he found different proofs that another civilization had reached the Americas way before he did. Historians agree that they were black Africans. Tiomoko Konati, head of the project tracking Abu Bakr II's journey, told BBC that Columbus himself said he found black traders already present in the Americas. Moreover, chemical analysis of the gold tips that Columbus found on spears in America show that the gold most probably came from West Africa. Some say that beyond Columbus, evidence of African contributions to American civilization includes importing of the art of pyramid building, political systems, and religious practices, as well as mathematics, writing, and a sophisticated calendar. Van Sertima cites the Aztec divinity Quetzalcoatl, who was sometimes represented in Mexico as a black man with a beard, dressed in white, who arrived 6 cycles after the last man who came from the foreign lands. Others also say that the presence of stone heads with African features of the ancient Olmec civilization in South America prior to the Aztecs and Mayans is even more proof. With mounting evidence to suggest African presence in the Americas before Columbus, it may be fair to say that Africa's relationship with the Americas did not start with slavery, but with sailors, explorers, and kings. It pisses me off that we didn't learn about this in school. Mansa Musa is supposed to be the greatest and richest king in history, and I only heard about the guy a couple of years ago. I am also pissed that we didn't learn enough about Al-Andalusia in Spain. The Arabic word for it is Al-Andalus. I remember that our textbook in high school had 1 page on the place and its history. That's all. It turns out that the majority of the Iberian Peninsula, which is now Spain and Portugal, was ruled by Arab African Muslims from North Africa, and the people residing in the peninsula were called Black Europeans. I had no idea. These people were a mixed race of Berbers and Arabs, leftovers from the Umayyad Khilafah, who eventually formed their own empire, and in the Middle Ages were the center of knowledge, culture, art, and trade in Europe. At its peak, Al-Andalus had a population between 700 to 800,000 Muslims, around 70,000 Jews, and a minority of Christians. Europeans named the Arabs and Jews of Al-Andalus Moors. It came from the Latin word Moris. The term was originally used to describe Berbers and other people from the ancient Roman province of Mauritania, in what is now North Africa. Over time, it was increasingly applied to Muslims and Jews living in Europe. 8 centuries of Arab-Muslim rule in Al-Andalus left a deep cultural impact on Spain, as well as Sicily that was later occupied by the Moors. Much of the Arabic influence upon Spanish came through the various Arabized Romance dialects, that were spoken in areas under Moorish rule, known today by scholars as Mozarabic. This resulted in Spanish often having both Arabic and Latin-derived words with the same meaning. I remember mentioning the love the Arabs have for poetry in a previous video. I guess this reiterates that. It is said that Abdurrahman III, who became the Emir of Cordoba or Qurtuba in 912, maintained peace in the Iberian Peninsula between Muslims, Jews, and Christians. He reigned up until 961, marked the zenith of Islamic civilization in Spain and the pinnacle of its golden age. By early 1492, the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, completed the Reconquista or the reconquest of Spain, defeating the last of the Muslim kingdoms, Granada. By the end of the century, the Inquisition, which had begun a century earlier, had coursed between 300 and 800,000 Muslims, and probably at least 70,000 Jews, to convert to Christianity. Spanish Catholics often suspected the Moriscos, or converses, of practicing Islam or Judaism in secret, and the Inquisition pursued and persecuted them. Some almost certainly sailed in Columbus's crew, carrying Islam in their hearts and minds to the New World in America. It is believed that the maps Columbus used in his journey were created by the Moors. Here comes a surprising thing to me. During the Spanish conquest of the Americas, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, the chronicler of Herman Cortez's conquest of Mesoamerica, admired the costumes of native women dancers by writing, very well dressed in their own way and seemed like Moorish women. The Spanish routinely used the word mezquita, Spanish for mosque, to refer to Native American religious sites. Traveling through Anahuac, today's Texas and Mexico, Cortez reported that he saw more than 400 mosques. Islam served as a kind of blueprint or algorithm for the Spanish in the New World. As they encountered people and things new to them, they turned to Islam to try to understand what they were seeing. Even the name California might have some Arabic lineage. The Spanish gave the name in 1535, taking it from the deeds of Espandian, 1510, a romance novel popular with the conquistadors. The novel features a rich island, California, ruled by black Amazonians, and their queen, Calafia. The deeds of Esplandian had been published in Seville, a city that had for centuries been part of the Umayyad Khilafah. Caliph, Calafia, California. Personally, I think that it may be far-fetched, but who knows? Across the Western Hemisphere, whenever they arrived at new lands or encountered native peoples, Spanish conquistadors read the Requerimiento, a stylized legal pronouncement. In essence, it announced a new state of society, offering Native Americans the chance to convert to Christianity and submit to Spanish rule, or else bear responsibility for all the deaths and losses that would follow. A formal and public announcement of the intent to conquer, including an offer to the faithless of a chance to submit and become believers. Following centuries of war with the Muslims back in Europe, the Spanish had adopted this practice, Christianized it, called it the Requerimiento, and took it to America. Iberian Christians might have thought Islam wrong or even diabolical, but they also knew it well. If they thought it strange, it must be counted as a very familiar strange. 12 million indigenous people are believed to have died in what is today the conterminous United States between 1492 and 1900. Complete civilizations and cultures with their people were wiped out, so it is very difficult to know what exactly existed in the American continent and what was found, as history is always written by the victor. The writing of American history has also been dominated by Puritan institutions. It might no longer be quite true, as the historian and Southerner U.B. Phillips complained more than 100 years ago that Boston had written the history of the US and largely written it wrong. But when it comes to the history of religion in America, the consequences of the domination of the leading Puritan institutions in Boston, Harvard University, and New Haven, Yale University, remain formidable. This Puritan effect on seeing and understanding religion in early America and the origins of the US brings real distortion, as though we were to turn the political history of the 20th century Europe over to the Trotskyites, a political ideology by Leon Trotsky that was mainly communist. You could look up the politics online if you want. Arabs and Muslims were part of Greater America from the start, including those parts of it that would become the United States. In 1527, Mustafa Zimuri, an Arab Muslim from the Moroccan coast, arrived in Florida as a slave on a disastrous Spanish expedition led by Panfilo de Narvaez. Against all odds, Zimuri survived and made a life for himself, traveling from the coasts of the Gulf of Mexico through what is now the southwestern US, as well as Mesoamerica. He struggled through servitude to native peoples before fashioning himself into a well-known and respected medicine man. In 1542, Cabeza de Vaca, one of the 4 survivors of the Narvaez expedition, published the first European book, later known as Adventures in the Unknown Interior of America, devoted to North America. De Vaca told of the disasters that befell the conquistadors and of the 8 years that the survivors spent wandering through North America and Mesoamerica. De Vaca even acknowledged that it was Zimuri who became the indispensable one. It was, wrote De Vaca, the Negro who talked to them all the time. The them were the Native Americans, and it was Zimuri's facility with native languages that kept the men alive, and even after a time allowed them a kind of flourishing. It is believed that this language was Arabic. Between 1675 and 1700, the beginnings of a plantation society in the Chesapeake allowed local slave masters to bring more than 6,000 Africans to Virginia and Maryland. This boom in the trade propelled an important change in American life. In 1668, white servants in the Chesapeake had outnumbered black slaves by 5 to 1. By 1700, the ratio had been reversed. Over the first 4 decades of the 18th century, more Africans came to the Chesapeake. Between 1700 and 1710, growing planter wealth led to the importation of another 8,000 enslaved Africans. By the 1730s, an additional 2,000 slaves per year at least came to the Chesapeake. The American Chesapeake was transforming from a society with slaves — most societies in human history have had slaves — to a slave society, which is far more unusual. In a slave society, slavery is the foundation of economic life, and the master-slave relationship serves as the exemplary social relation, a model for all others. African slaves at that time were brought in from the Senegal, Gambia, Mali, and Guinea-Bissau. It is well known that much of their population consisted of Muslims. From all the African slave ships that arrived to America, it is believed that at least 20% of the slaves were Muslim. In 1758, Kunta Kinte, whose story was told in Alex Haley's book Roots, came from Gambia to the New World. Those of you who read the book know how, as a Muslim, how he struggled with his culture and faith, which were not accepted by his master. I remember when reading the book that he was forced to eat pork to save himself from starvation. It was noted that Kunta Kinte was from the Mandinka tribe and spoke the Mandinka language. I just found out recently that this language uses Arabic alphabets. Although Kunta's descendants were free at last in the end of the story, their history, culture, and religion were literally erased. Another less famous character was Omar bin Said. His autobiography was published in the US Library of Congress in 2017. He was an African Muslim man from Senegal who was enslaved and sold in Charleston, South Carolina. This well-educated slave, who later converted to Christianity, wrote his memoirs in Arabic, starting with a verse from the Quran, which explained that everything in this universe, including man, was owned by God alone. This was clearly a protest against slavery. In his memoir, he speaks about the events leading to his capture in Africa in 1807 and how he was shipped to America and sold. He was also Mandinka and died in 1864 in North Carolina. Based on his autobiography, West African as well as American history are being rewritten as we speak, as they unfold events that written history never brought up. I mentioned earlier that the Spaniards found many mosques and Muslims when they arrived to the Americas, and this may seem far-fetched to some of you, so here's some more evidence. A Muslim historian and geographer, Abdul Hassan Ali ibn al-Hussein al-Mas'udi, 1871 to 957, wrote in his book Muruj al-Dhahab wa Ma'adin al-Jawahir, The Meadows of Gold and Quarries of Jewels, that during the rule of the Muslim Caliph of Spain, Abdullah ibn Muhammad, 888 to 912, a Muslim navigator, Khashkhash ibn Sa'id ibn Aswad of Qurtuba, Spain, sailed from Dalba, Palos, in 889, crossed the Atlantic, reached an unknown territory, Ard Majhula, and returned with fabulous treasures. In al-Mas'ud's map of the world, there is a large area in the ocean of darkness and fog, the Atlantic Ocean, which he referred to as the unknown territory, the Americas. A Muslim historian, Abu Bakr ibn Umar al-Ghutiyya, narrated that during the reign of the Muslim Caliph of Spain, Hisham II, 976 to 1009, another Muslim navigator, Ibn Faruq of Ghurnata, sailed from Kadesh, February 999, to the Atlantic, landed in Gondo, Great Canary Islands, visiting King Guanariga, and continued westward, where he saw and named two islands, Caparia and Plutana. He arrived back in Spain in May 999. Columbus sailed from Palos, Dalba, Spain. He was bound for Gomera, Canary Islands. There he fell in love with Beatriz Bobadilla, daughter of the first Captain General of the island. The family name Bobadilla is derived from the Arabic Islamic name Abu Abdullah. Nevertheless, the Bobadilla clan was not easy to ignore. Another Bobadilla, Francisco, later as the royal commissioner, put Columbus in chains and transferred him from Santo Domingo back to Spain in November 1500. The Bobadilla family was related to the Abbasid dynasty in Seville, 1031 to 1091. On October 12, 1492, Columbus landed in a little island in the Bahamas that was called Guanahani by the natives, renamed San Salvador by Columbus. Guanahani is derived from Mandinka and modified Arabic words. Guana, Ikhwan, means brothers, and Hani is an Arabic name. Therefore, the original name of the island is Hani Brothers. Ferdinand Columbus, the son of Christopher, who wrote about the blacks seen by his father in Honduras, the people who live farther east of Point Canivas, as far as Cape Gracios a Dios, are almost black in color. At the same time, in this very same region, lived a tribe of Muslim natives known as Al-Mami. In Mandinka and Arabic languages, Al-Mami was the designation of Al-Imam, the person who leads in prayer, or in some cases, the chief of the community, or a member of the Imami Muslim community. A renowned American historian and linguist, Leo Weiner of Harvard University, in his book, Africa and the Discovery of America, 1920, wrote that Columbus was well aware of the Mandinka presence in the New World, and that the West African Muslims had spread throughout the Caribbean, Central, South, and North American territories, including Canada, where they were trading and intermarrying with the Iroquois and Algonquin Indians. When I look at history all around the world, I see a lot of blood, death, and destruction. I see wars and genocide, which have two sides to every single story. I see a second crusade that came to America and wiped out its original inhabitants. I see tyranny and colonialism at their worst. I always imagined what could have happened if the Mongols never attacked and destroyed the Abbasid Empire, and along with it, the Islamic Golden Age. And what would the natives in America be like today if not wiped out? And what would Africa be like if it wasn't invaded from left, right, and center? What would the Middle East be like if the Crusades never happened? And more and more. Being optimistic is who I am, and if I could take one good thing from all of this chaos, It's that we are all connected genetically. We are all related. From the Middle East to Asia to Africa and Europe, and all the way to the indigenous people of America. I guess we are all one big tribe after all. And I finally know why Arabs in America are always mistaken for Latin Americans. It's the Moors genes. In my next video, I'll be talking about Arab immigrants in the 1900s and Martin Luther King. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this video. Go ahead and click on that teeny weeny subscribe button. Go ahead, you can do it. And don't forget to like and share. And if you want to support the growth of this channel, click on my Patreon link in the description box. My son Aboud finally helped me set up my merch store. I'll be donating a portion of the money to charity. So if you're interested, the link is also available in the description box. As of 2019, more than 5.6 million Palestinians were registered with the UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, of which more than 1.5 million live in UNRWA-run camps. I mentioned privilege in my first part of this series, and in order for us to feel grateful, let's take a look at Palestinian refugees to understand how privileged we really are. Many Palestinian refugees hold travel documents instead of real passports. For those of you who don't know what these are, they look like passports. But these documents declare that the person holding this document is not a citizen of the country that issued them. As always, I don't want to talk about politics, but I'm going to try to make a point here. Before 1967, these documents were issued in some countries for refugees from Gaza, the West Bank, and other parts of North Palestine. In many cases, these individuals need permission to come back to the countries if they left to go study or work outside. Also, they aren't always allowed to work or study in the same countries issuing these documents, as they are not citizens. Also, in some cases, they are not allowed to leave the refugee camp, nor are outsiders allowed to enter these camps. So as a Palestinian refugee, you can't go to a decent school outside of this camp, nor get a decent job. Many of the people in these camps have been waiting for over 70 years to go back home, stuck in the land that they are not allowed to call home. And for those of them who are lucky enough to get a chance to work abroad and make better lives for themselves, it could be very difficult sometimes to renew their work visas, or even get a visa to a country where they can travel on vacation, God forbid. Palestinians holding travel documents have gotten used to being stranded at airports for extra security screening way before 9/11. Please be patient with me as I'm trying to prove a point about Arabs in America. So let's continue. The right of return, or haqq al-awda, is a principle in international law which guarantees everyone's right of voluntary return or re-entry to their country of origin or of citizenship. The right of return is a part of a broader human rights concept and freedom of movement, and is also related to the legal concept of nationality. But what will Palestinians return to? Occupation or apartheid? Or maybe something worse? Now, do you guys feel privileged yet? So when these international refugees hear about countries like the USA, Canada, or Europe, where citizens of these countries can travel almost anywhere without visas, get a pension, health insurance, have the right to own a home and work, and avail whatever minimum advantages there is to being a citizen of this country, the obvious choice is to want to move there. And in the early 70s is when my parents decided to move to New York to pursue the American dream. The American dream is the idea by which equality of opportunity is available to any American, allowing the highest aspirations and goals to be achieved. Although more than half of American adults no longer believe in this idea anymore, this dream is still being chased by many people in the Middle East and all around the world. I believe that when a person feels that all hope is lost, it's only natural for them to seek dwelling elsewhere. Arab American communities have a long history in the United States. The diverse group includes anyone who came from or whose prior relatives came from the 22 Arabic-speaking countries in North Africa and the Middle East. Starting in the late 19th century, immigrants from the Ottoman Empire began to migrate to the United States to find work or escape political conflicts. This immigration slowed down in 1924 when the US government instituted immigration quotas that prioritized people from Northern and Western Europe, and picked up again after 1965. That followed the 1964 Civil Rights Movement, which was 1 year earlier when the United States got rid of the quota system. After this, Arab immigration mostly increased until 2017 and 18, when travel bans targeting predominantly Muslim countries slowed down this immigration. President Joe Biden revoked this existing travel ban in 2021 when he took office, but the ban still significantly slowed down Arab immigration to the United States. The first period of major migration from the Arab world started around 1880 and lasted until 1924. During this period, roughly 95,000 immigrants came to the US from what was known as Greater Syria, a region in the Ottoman Empire. This region included present-day Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. Israel didn't exist until 1948. The biggest driver really was the sort of disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, which dissolved after World War I, and the financial pressures that were prevalent on Mount Lebanon in particular, says Randa Kayali, author of The Arab Americans. In Lebanon, a blight or plant disease on the mulberry trees, important to silk production, caused a collapse in the industry, leading many silk farmers to look for work in other countries. Immigrants from Lebanon and other parts of Greater Syria left to escape poverty and famine, but also political issues. In the early 1900s, the Ottoman Empire's decision to conscript Christians as well as Muslims into their military motivated Christians in Greater Syria to immigrate. Once in the United States, many Arab immigrants found work in factories in the Northeast or Northwest. Some of the first mosques in the country were built by Muslim Arab Americans in North Dakota, Michigan, and Iowa. Others worked as peddlers, selling goods door to door throughout the country. Because of the travel involved in peddling, by 1900, you would find a small Arab community in just about any state, says Matthew Jaber Stifler, a researcher at the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Though Arab immigration dropped during World War I, the major shift in immigration came in 1924 when the United States passed an Immigration Act known as the Johnson-Reed Act. This law established a quota system that favored immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, while severely restricting the ability of people from other parts of the world to immigrate to the United States. The Johnson-Reed Act's quota system was in place for 4 decades, and it drastically reduced the number of Arab immigrants to the United States. With its passage in 1924, immigration from the Arab world dropped to about 1,000 people or fewer a year. After World War II, the United States began to make some exceptions that slightly increased the number of immigrants coming from Arab countries. The US government made exceptions for doctors, scientists, engineers, and other people with sought-out professional skills who wanted to immigrate to the United States. As a result, many educated people from countries like Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq came to the United States, marking the beginning of a phenomenon known as the brain drain, which I guess means that the talent and skill of a country or its brains being drained because they are moving out to live elsewhere. The other exception involved refugees. The wars in Palestine in the late 40s that led to the establishment of Israel and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians led many to seek refuge in other countries. The Refugee Relief Act in 1953 allowed 2,000 Palestinian families to immigrate to the United States. The US also accepted another 985 Palestinian families in the late 1950s and early 1960s. In 1965, the United States experienced another major shift in immigration policy. The Hart-Celler Immigration and Nationality Act eliminated the discriminatory quota system from 1924, allowing many more people from outside Northern and Western Europe to immigrate to the country. This led to an increase in immigration to the United States from all over the world, including Arab countries. The new law led to a big increase in Arab immigration. Between 1960 and 1990, some 400,000 people immigrated to the United States from the Arab world. Many of these immigrants were educated professionals or students who came to the US to study at US schools and found work in the country afterwards. Others were refugees fleeing conflicts at home. In addition to Palestinians who continued to flee displacement and discrimination, the United States began to receive refugees from the Lebanese Civil War, which lasted from 1975 to 1990. The fourth major immigration period from 1990 to the present day has been very fraught. During this period, many refugees fled conflict in the Middle East, including wars that the United States has ironically started. After the attacks on September 11, 2001, the United States began to require male Muslims over the age of 16 who had recently immigrated from certain Arab countries to submit to annual photographs and fingerprints, making many Arab Americans feel unwelcome in the country. After a brief decline, Arab immigration continued to grow in the 21st century, with tens of thousands of Arab immigrants entering the country every year. However, Arab immigration dropped substantially in 2017 when President Donald Trump signed an executive order severely restricting travel, immigration, or the ability to claim refugee status from 7 predominantly Muslim countries: Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. In 2018, the US Supreme Court upheld an amended version of the ban targeting people from these countries, as well as North Korea and Venezuela. President Joe Biden revoked the ban in 2021 when he took office. By a wide margin, the US has more immigrants than any other country in the world. As of 2015, the United Nations estimates that 46.6 million people living in the United States were not born there. This means that about 1 in 5 international migrants, 19%, live in the US. The US immigrant population is nearly 4 times that of the world's next largest immigrant destination, Germany, with about 12 million immigrants. The UN's figure of 46.6 million includes Puerto Rico and others born in US territories. They are not counted as immigrants by the US Census Bureau or in most Pew Research Center publications. People born in Puerto Rico and US territories are US citizens at birth. Several other countries, such as France, the United Kingdom, and China, also have territories and special administrative regions, which the UN treats as distinct origins and destinations of international migrants. We all know that the America we know today was built by immigrants, and that America proudly celebrates this with most of its public holidays. These immigrants brought their culture with them, the music, the food, the fashion, and all the stories that came with them. That's excluding chocolate hummus. I hate the people who invented that. This video is a tribute to all the people who are able to make better lives for themselves, as well as the ones still trying. I talked in the past about Orientalism and how many people in the West view us, which was influenced by colonialism. But did you ever think about how Arabs view America? When Arabs around me here find out that I'm an American citizen, most of them are surprised. and ask, why aren't I living in the States? And the tone is like, what are you, crazy? They have this romantic notion about people living the dream over there. Others make remarks like, I wouldn't want to live there with such a high crime rate. I even get remarks like, I'll go to jail for hitting my kids. I'm going to talk about perception in my next video, so stay tuned. Maybe I should make a full video on how Arabs view Americans and the West. Who knows? Thanks for sticking around to the end of this video. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to check out my Patreon link in the description box below. Until next time.